only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror. Terror.
Horror film. A feeling of fear, dread, and shock created by showing frightening or gory images. Since the very beginning of film history, horror films have been scaring their audiences by playing on their hidden fears and their nightmares. They've reflected the fears of those watching them, become pop culture icons, enjoyed status as the most popular genre at times, and are still enjoyed today.
I love horror films.
Personally, I watch them 24/7, really. I like them.
So why are horror films so popular? How have they changed throughout history? How have they affected our imaginations? What type of positive messages are in horror films? To answer these questions, we must delve deeper into the history of the horror film. The first horror film was the 1896 French film, Le Manoir du Diable, which translates into The Manor of the Devil. Known as The Haunted Castle in America, this 3-minute film by Georges Méliès was first released on Christmas Eve of 1896. With a vampire-like devil, the film was meant as a comedy, but the effect on the audience was not comedic. The first film monster came to screen in 1905, Quasimodo, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Based off the book by Victor Hugo, Quasimodo enjoyed scaring audiences so much that he appeared 3 more times over the next 6 years. Audiences were fascinated with the hunchbacked man. Even today, in the world we live in, with all the science and medical advances, people still stare at someone or something that's different from them. Whether it's a midget, somebody seriously burned or disfigured, even really tall people are sometimes stared at. Back when Quasimodo was famous, they didn't have all the medical explanations that they have now. So because they didn't understand him, they were frightened of him. Unfortunately, all copies of the early Hunchback films have been lost. In 1910, the next film monster came to screen, Frankenstein. Made by Edison Studios, the film used the grotesque figure of Frankenstein's monster to show the audience the insanity of the tragic hero. In 1922, a vampire came to the screen for the first time in the German film Nosferatu. Based off Bram Stoker's Dracula, the film studio responsible for making it was sued for copyright infringement, and almost all prints of the film were destroyed. The few prints left were duplicated by audiences throughout the years as a steady cult following was made. The film set the stage on how to make creepy sets and castles. But the biggest effect of Nosferatu? Sunlight. So does sunlight kill vampires?
Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it can.
Yes.
The original answer? No. In the book of Dracula, sunlight doesn't kill vampires. It merely severely weakens them. But Nosferatu added another way to kill vampires, and this one has become quite popular. Okay, so maybe Twilight kills vampires too. The next 20 years of horror films involved more disfigurement, stalkers in the middle of the night, and mad scientists. These movies include Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Waxworks, The Monster, Phantom of the Opera, and The Man Who Laughs. So what's the significance of these films? World War I. Because the war was over, the veterans were all coming home, except they weren't all the same as when they left. Many of them had their own scars and disfigurements. We had tanks and machine guns for the first time, and people back home didn't know what the effects would have on the survivors. So they'd see these tragically disfigured people as monsters, and the mad scientists as the people that caused it. And the early movies seriously played off this. But horror movies morphed in the 30s and 40s, taking the next step from disfigurement to all-out monsters. And there was one studio mainly responsible for this: Universal Pictures.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! In the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God!
In the 30s alone, Universal came out with 17 horror films. 13 of them starred one of or both of two actors, Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. So why are those names so familiar? Lugosi is Dracula, and Karloff is Frankenstein's monster. It's who they are. It's what they are famous for. And every other portrayal of Dracula and Frankenstein's monster is based off their portrayals as them.
I was raised on the Universal monsters, so watching those and getting a great appreciation for horror films eventually brought me to the more modern day horror films.
I am Dracula.
Dracula was very alluring.
Picture him as very dark, aristocratic, a gentleman.
With Dracula, the exotic accent,
The classic cape,
the deliberate way he talks,
the whole hypnotism thing when he goes like this.
that's all Lugosi.
He just has the creepy persona.
None of that comes from the book. In the book, he was just a handsome and charismatic count.
Dracula also raised the stakes very high for vampires.
So the way that everybody thinks of Dracula, that's Lugosi.
Every vampire film or TV show I watch, I compare him to Dracula.
This really a huge big part of even what some vampires are today.
I like Dracula, he's my favorite.
I want to drink your blood.
While Universal achieved popularity with these monsters' state-of-the-art costuming and makeup effects, another studio was trying a different strategy. In 1933, the now non-existent RKO Radio Pictures came out with one of their most famous movies, and one of the first eco-horror movies ever made, King Kong.
We're millionaires, boys! I'll share it with all of you! Why, in a few months it'll be up in lights on Broadway! Kong! The eighth wonder of the world!
With state-of-the-art special effects, King Kong used movable models, both miniature and full-size, to create the giant gorilla and dinosaurs of Skull Island. King Kong opened to immediate success and paved the way for giant monsters and animals of later years. Meanwhile, Universal Pictures continued to enjoy the success of their monsters. If 17 horror films were a lot for the 30s, then the over 45 films made by Universal in the 40s was incredible.
Children of the night. What music they make.
Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, The Mummy, and The Invisible Man started pouring out many more sequels. And in the 40s, another actor became famously associated with the Universal monster, Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. While not the first werewolf movie ever made, it was by far the most popular and the most influential.
Even a man who's pure in heart
And says his prayers at night and become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms.
And the autumn moon is bright. Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman influenced the design of a lot of other werewolf movies and costumes. An American Werewolf in London, Teen Wolf, and Van Helsing. They all copied the design to an extent, and some have even evolved the design further. Even the famous Marvel superhero Wolverine is said to have taken some influence from Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman. The Universal monsters had reached an all-time high, but all good things must eventually come to an end. With the continued sequels becoming more and more campy, audiences slowly lost interest in the Universal monsters. The classical monsters had cemented their place in history. There would always be movies made about them. But while they once took the place of the main fear in their audience's mind, they were now replaced by bigger fears. With the fears of living in the atomic age and social alienation, many horror films in the 50s merged with sci-fi films and revolved around either alien invasions or mutations of animals, insects, and people. People in the 50s knew about the atom bomb and they knew about radiation, but they didn't know the exact effects radiation would have on them, and they worried about what it would do to them a lot.
Yes, cities, nations, even civilization itself, threatened with annihilation, because in one moment of history-making violence, nature, mad, rampant, wrought its most awesome creation.
They worried that science had gone too far, and they worried what science would do to them and the world as they knew it if it went too far.
I tell you, gentlemen, science has agreed that unless something is done and done quickly, man as the dominant species of life on Earth will be extinct within a year.
Movies like Godzilla, The Blob, Them, The Incredible Shrinking Man, they're all early eco-horror films that show people pushing science too far. Mutations weren't the only horror films of the 50s. Famous films from this period include films such as Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Jack Arnold's Creature from the Black Lagoon, Brian Haskin's The War of the Worlds, and Andre de Toth's House of Wax. House of Wax, made in 1953 and starring Vincent Price, introduced something new to film audiences everywhere: stereophonic sound and 3D in one movie. While not the first 3D film, or the first film with stereophonic sound, House of Wax was the first film to combine the two for the first real 3D film.
Well, there's someone with a bag of popcorn. Close your mouth, it's the bag I'm aiming at, not your tonsils. Here she comes. Well, look at that, it's in the bag.
House of Wax was the movie that made 3D movies popular and made the idea of 3D credible. It combined visuals that popped out at you along with stereophonic sound, which at the time, keep in mind, most people had never seen before. Nowadays, stereophonic sound, aka stereo sound, is used all the time, but back then, nope. Up to this point, most movies used monophonic sound, which only used one track of sound. Monophonic sound, known today as just mono, couldn't really convey any form of distance or direction. It always came into the middle of the viewer's sound field. Stereophonic sound, or stereo, introduced the concept of having multiple tracks of sound, so that you could now have distance and direction shown through sound, all coming from different speakers. Simply put, mono is 2D sound, while stereo is 3D sound. In the 3 years that they were popular, over 50 3D films were made, most of them horror films. Unfortunately, despite the interest in 3D films, the complications in how to make the 3D and show them at theaters caused studios to stop making them. Very few films were made in 3D until the 80s, but the early 3D horror films of the 50s had already permanently left their mark on the world. While eco-horror films continued to be popular in the 60s, the decade brought forth two new horror genres to the mix: demonic films and slasher films. While movies like The Little Shop of Horrors, The Birds, The Last Man on Earth were being made along with countless monster movies, we now had studios experimenting with movies that messed with your mind, your faith, and what you believed in, as well as how you looked at strangers. The first slasher film, Peeping Tom, made in 1960 by Michael Powell, stuck audiences in the killer's POV for the very first time. This was soon followed by one of Alfred Hitchcock's most famous films, Psycho, starring Anthony Perkins, Janet Leigh, and Vera Miles. Relying on suspense along with shocking death scenes, Psycho quickly became a cult favorite, and while controversial, set a new standard for the amount of violence and sexuality allowed in a film, and it reportedly made people afraid to go into their shower.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Around the same time, demonic films were also gaining some headway. Two popular demonic films of the 60s were The Haunting by Robert Wise in 1963 and Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, made in 1968. While not about possession or a haunting, Rosemary's Baby shocked audiences everywhere with the story of a woman who is drugged by Satanists and becomes pregnant with Satan's baby after being raped. The most famous zombie movie of all time was also made in the 60s. George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, made in 1968, grossing over $12 million at the box office in the US alone. Romero's zombie classic did for zombie films what the Universal monster films did for their respective monsters. Night of the Living Dead wasn't the first zombie movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it was the movie that made zombies popular. The image of a dead, decaying, groaning corpse shambling towards you, that's all George Romero. Originally in horror films, zombies were just people being mind-controlled via voodoo or black magic. In Living Dead, they were, for the very first time, walking dead people. The popular TV show and comic book series, The Walking Dead, pays homage to Romero's vision. In Night of the Living Dead, the hero character, Ben, is played by Dwayne Jones. In The Walking Dead, one of the very first characters we meet is a kid by the name of Dwayne Jones. The 70s and 80s were a period for horror films when no particular subgenre was more popular than others. With films across the board, there was nothing that couldn't be done. And one of the first to prove this is what's considered the scariest horror film of all time.
The Exorcist.
Exorcist.
Made in 1973 by William Friedkin and inspired by a true story, The Exorcist told the frightening tale of a young girl who becomes possessed by the devil. The second most popular movie of the year, following The Sting, The Exorcist changed the horror genre and its audiences forever. The Exorcist is terrifying for multiple reasons. A, they made the devil himself the villain, and everybody knows that the devil is indestructible and can't be beaten by mere humans. B, it's based off a true story. And C, which ties back to B, it's realistic. It can really happen.
Demon possession is a real thing. Many people are going to be afraid of that. The whole thought of an evil being taking over your body and the possibility that the demon came into you because you had an open mind and kind of like a weak soul when it comes to demon possession. It's a horrifying thought, and you don't want you wouldn't want that to happen to you.
Even though the effects aren't the greatest I've seen in my life, it's so real and so creepy. I cried a lot. I saw it when I was 9.
The Exorcist was the very first movie that showed people being possessed, and it scared audiences. It still scares people to this day.
I mean, seriously, after The Exorcist came out, a whole bunch of many Catholics went to confession right after it.
It's movies like this that shows us the ugly truth about the battles between good and evil, and most people want to choose the side of good. The Exorcist was followed by a string of other famous demonic possession films, including Richard Donner's 1976 The Omen and the 1977 film Alice, Sweet Alice by Alfred Soule. Stephen King, the famous horror novelist, started to have his novels adapted to screen around this time. The first one, Carrie, was made in 1976 by Brian De Palma. It became the 9th highest grossing film of the year.
Here's Johnny!
Later, The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, was released in 1980. While initially not very successful at the box office, The Shining became a sleeper hit. Eco-horror films also remain popular, proven by Steven Spielberg's 1975 Jaws. Jaws quickly became the highest-grossing film of all time until the original Star Wars, and is still considered by many to be one of the greatest films of all time.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
The first film to be a summer blockbuster, Jaws had 3 things that other films never had at this point. It put gore into a high-budget film, it was heavily promoted, and it was released simultaneously in thousands of theaters around the US. In movie histories, movies were released slowly into only a few theaters. As they gained popularity, they would be released into more and more theaters. But they weren't particularly promoted, nor were they released all over the country like movies of today. And not only that, but high-budget movies were normally released during the winter, because people had less things to do then. Summer was the time where the low-budget movies were saved for. But Jaws was different. It changed how and when people went to go see movies. Jaws didn't just have an effect on the movie business, though. The Jaws effect caused people to stereotype all sharks as mindless killing machines, and hundreds of fishermen to participate in shark killing competitions. Reports say that in the next few years, more people were afraid of the water, less people went to beaches, and more shark sightings were reported. Jaws was one of the first eco-horror films that took a normal, yet scary, animal and made it a serial killer without mutating it in any way. In this case, a great white shark. But until near the end of the film, we never see anything more than its dorsal fin. We know that the shark is there because of its fin and because of the simple but amazingly tense musical score by John Williams. It's because we don't see the shark that the movie is so terrifying. It made people afraid to get into the water.
And he scares the living bejesus out of everyone in the water. It made a lot of people afraid to swim, whether it is at the beach or in a pool. I know when I first saw Jaws when I was younger, I was afraid to swim in a pool, even if there was a light on in the pool at night. I was afraid to swim in it because I think Jaws was going to come up and eat me alive.
Smile, you son of a...
Soon there was even a movie that was called Jaws in Space, Ridley Scott's incredibly successful Alien. Set in the future, Alien combined the suspense and violence of a 70s film with the story and elements of a classical sci-fi film. Alien was different from other films in that it took place in the future. And not only did it take place in the future and with a futuristic monster, but it took something that can disturb many people depending on how it's used: sex. Dan O'Bannon, the writer of the movie, said, quote, "I am going to put in every image I can think of to make the men in the audience cross their legs. Homosexual oral rape, birth, the thing lays its eggs down your throat, the whole number." End quote.
It's coming!
While horror films became more serious, they became more comedic at the same time. In 1974, Mel Brooks' horror comedy Young Frankenstein came out.
Starring Gene Wilder as Dr. Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
Peter Boyle as the monster. Marty Feldman as Igor.
My grandfather used to work for your grandfather. I'm sure we'll get along splendidly. Oh, sorry.
One of Mel Brooks' most famous films, the film is known as one of the funniest films of all time.
But don't see it alone.
And gave the band Aerosmith inspiration for the lyrics of the song,
Walk this way.
While Psycho had been released over 13 years before to wild success, very few slasher films had still been made by this point. This all changed in 1974 when Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and its signature villain, Leatherface, started several cliches for slasher films. The first is that the killer is devoid of any real personality. Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees both follow this tradition in that neither one of them show any emotion. They are stripped of all humanity. The second cliche is that the killer has some signature form of clothing. For Leatherface, it's a mask made out of other people's flesh. The third, which is similar to the second, is that they all have a signature weapon. For Leatherface, it's a chainsaw. Fourth, the killer is generally unkillable. They always come back for a bunch of sequels. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre started this sequel spawn. Other slashers soon followed. Bob Clark's Black Christmas and Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes were among the first. And then, in 1978, it happened.
Come on out.
John Carpenter's Halloween, starring Donald Pleasance and Janet Leigh's daughter Jamie Lee Curtis in her debut role. Halloween cemented Jamie Lee Curtis's role as a scream queen and as an actress. And audiences loved her character, Laurie Strode, and the deranged killer, Michael Myers. Even with very little advertising and relying almost purely on word of mouth, Halloween grossed $47 million in the US alone. Michael Myers instantly became a pop culture icon, leading to 7 sequels, a remake, and a sequel to the remake. And similar to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween changed the genre even more.
The first Halloween movie I watched was the first one, and I watched it with the lights off in my bedroom. And just like seeing like the times when all you see is Michael Myers' mask, sleep, I could not sleep for the life of me, because every time when the lights were off and I thought like there was some creepy like white thing coming at me, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Just like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween started several practices that are still used in horror films, especially slasher films today. It gave the killer his own unique theme song. It made most of the victims teenagers who were either sexually promiscuous or drug abusers. And while not inventing it, it popularized the cliche of the final girl, which is that the hero of the movie is almost always a girl who somehow survives against impossible odds.
The final girl concept started when people started to realize that a lot of the final people at the end of horror movies were girls, and they usually represented the epitome of innocence and purity, and were able to outsmart the villains in one way or another.
Halloween was soon followed by two more slashers that would become pop culture icons: Sean Cunningham's Friday the 13th in 1980 and Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984. All three movies spawned a wealth of sequels, book series, action figures, comic books, costumes, and other types of merchandise. With films alone, Friday the 13th had 9 sequels, a crossover film with Freddy Krueger, a TV series, and a remake.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
3, 4, better lock your door.
5, 6, grab your crucifix. 7, 8, better stay up late.
Nightmare on Elm Street had 6 sequels, the crossover with Jason, a TV series, and a remake. Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger had joined the likes of Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman as the face for horror films.
They revolutionized the way people thought about horror movies. They developed new ways of killing people, creative ways of killing people. I mean, have you seen someone kill a person before in their sleep?
Pop culture, I mean, seriously, yeah, you'll find like many like t-shirts that have like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees on them, memes with them in them.
Their masks are everywhere. Their costumes are everywhere. You can buy them.
They've appeared in video games.
Freddy Krueger is now in Mortal Kombat.
They are just like very iconic and memorable characters. Jason Voorhees with the hockey mask and the machete. Freddy Krueger with like the burnt face and the razor claws. Leatherface that goes around chasing everyone with the chainsaw. Michael Myers and like the Halloween theme. They're just very memorable. And to make an iconic character and for them to be such an impact on pop culture society, they need to have very iconic things about them. Like going back to like Dracula and the Wolfman and Frankenstein. It's basically going back to those. So
the 90s seemed to continue many of the movie series and themes from the 70s and 80s. Halloween, Friday the 13th, and A Nightmare on Elm Street all saw several sequels in the 90s, all with mixed success. Classical-style horror movies with monsters and slashers were slowly dying out. Audiences now wanted science fiction, psychological thrillers, and fantasy. Famous horror films from this period include the 1991 crime thriller Silence of the Lambs and the 1993 science fiction adventure Jurassic Park, both based off best-selling novels. People no longer wanted gore or movies where the plot was all about survival of a killer. They wanted movies that had some sort of plot, some sort of conspiracy, or had elements of adventure in it. And both dinosaurs and FBI agents could give that to them. So both Jurassic Park and Silence of the Lambs were popular. But a new theme was also emerging in slasher films, being self-referential. With films like Bernard Rose's Candyman, George A. Romero's The Dark Half, and John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, horror films started investigating the link between reality and fiction. But 2 films, both by Wes Craven, became wildly successful for doing this. Wes Craven's New Nightmare, a sequel of sorts to the Nightmare on Elm Street series that focused on Freddy Krueger escaping into the real world, and Scream, a film that featured characters aware of real movies, characters who referenced those movies, and the cliches they had. Scream took a dying genre and revitalized it. The horror films of the time were becoming bigger and bigger failures, and the audiences could predict everything that could happen. Quite frankly, they didn't care about horror films anymore. The fans of all the horror films of the 80s had grown up, and in their place was an audience that loved sci-fi and fantasy films laced with CGI.
Just what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
But Scream understood the cliches of horror films, and they understood their audience. And because of that, they were able to take everything that the audience thought they knew and flip it on its head.
Oh, you want to play psycho killer? Can I be the helpless victim? Okay, let's see. No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
It was very tongue-in-cheek. It mocked itself and other horror films. But at the same time, it managed to be completely serious. And like all great horror films, it completely shocked its audience. Within the first 12 minutes of the film, the person everybody assumed was the main star, Drew Barrymore, was dead. Bam, she's gone, Ghostface killed her. And this made audiences realize that Scream was different than movies they were familiar with. And it was. The more realistic killer of the movie, Ghostface, had joined the other slasher greats as a pop culture icon. He was so popular that a year later, the costume was donned again, along with the surviving cast from the first movie, for the first of 3 sequels.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. Big no-no! Big no!
I'm a dead man.
Sex equals death, okay? Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. No, the sin factor. It says sin, it's an extension of number 1. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back!
You see, you push the laws and you end up dead. Okay, I'll see you in the kitchen with a knife.
Scream brought horror back to the public's eye, as more successful films such as I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend took some of its cues, as well as popular TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Soon, horror movies were flooding in again.
Well, it's a stab fanatic, clearly. Working on less of a shriekwell and more of a screamake.
Copyrighted terms, by the way.
Because all there are now are remakes. Only horror the studio's greenlight.
The 2000s brought forth the age of remakes, adaptations, and sequels. Many of the classic horror films, such as My Bloody Valentine, Children of the Corn, Prom Night, The Fog, The Hills Have Eyes, and of course, Halloween, Friday the 13th, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and A Nightmare on Elm Street all had remakes. Films such as The Ring, The Grudge, and The Eye were all American remakes of Asian horror films. Zombie films made a comeback as Dawn of the Dead, the original sequel to Night of the Living Dead, suddenly spawned a remake along with several sequels. And 28 Days Later and I Am Legend were made, along with 2 horror comedies, Zombieland and Shaun of the Dead. The popular horror genre video game series, Resident Evil, spawned a film series and is to date the only successful movie series based on a video game. The comic book series of Blade and Hellboy both had movie series adaptations made on them. Horror films were back in many ways, and they were back to stay.
So yes, people should definitely watch horror films.
Horror films make life fun.
They have great classic stories.
They make me more creative.
Most of them have a good moral message behind them.
Horror movies feed your imagination.
They just have like great characters, in my opinion.
The horror films have been criticized since they first came out. One cannot deny the impact they've had on pop culture, on society, and the immense popularity they've had at times. I'm Michael Bogan. Thanks for watching.